Welcome, traveler, to Forgotten Kingdoms of Africa, a channel where we explore the untold stories of the past and imagine the history that almost was. Today, we journey into the heat of the 14th century to the edge of the Sahel, where the earth itself seemed to sweat gold. We are following the footsteps of a man so wealthy that his name became synonymous with the sun, Mansa Musa, the Lion of Mali. History remembers his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324. They tell of the 60,000 men who followed him, the camels laden with hundreds of pounds of gold dust, and how his generosity in Cairo was so immense that it crashed the value of gold for a decade. This is the history you know. But gold is a heavy burden, and it carries many secrets. In the official records, Musa's wealth was a spectacle of piety and power. But in the shadow of the Great Mosque of Djenné, a different story is told. What if the crash of the Cairo gold market wasn't an accident of over-generosity? What if it were the first recorded instance of deliberate economic warfare? What if Timbuktu wasn't just a city of books, but the headquarters of a global financial network that functioned centuries before the first central banks of Europe? Tonight, we follow the gold, not to the markets of the north, but back to the source, back to the gilded silence of the Mali Empire. In 1324, Mansa Musa arrived in Cairo. The traditional narrative says he gave away so much gold that he accidentally devalued the metal. But let us look at the what is. Mansa Musa was a scholar king. He was surrounded by the finest minds from the University of Sankore. He knew exactly what he was doing. By flooding the Mediterranean markets with gold, he effectively broke the currencies of his rivals. He made the gold of the north worthless while keeping the source of the gold firmly under his control. It was a financial reset. While the European city-states scrambled to stabilize their economies, Mali took advantage of the chaos to acquire the one thing more valuable than gold: information. During his Hajj, Musa didn't just bring back architects like Abu Ishaq al-Saili. He brought back the blueprints of the world's most advanced shipyards and the ledgers of every major merchant house in the Levant. He was performing a hostile takeover of the global trade network. The wealth of Mali came from three primary gold fields: Bambouk, Bode, and Galam. For centuries, the exact locations of these mines were the most guarded secrets in the world. Traders from the north would bring salt, and in a process known as silent trade, they would leave it on the riverbanks. The miners would emerge, leave an equivalent amount of gold, and vanish back into the earth. In our alternate history, this silence was not just a protective measure against kidnappers or thieves. It was a ritual of resource sovereignty. The miners of Mali believed gold was a living entity, a skin of the earth that responded to vibration and intent. They weren't just digging, they were harvesting a crystalline material that held a specific frequency. While the rest of the world used gold as a shiny rock for jewelry, the Mansas, kings of Mali, understood its conductive properties. They used it to line the inner chambers of their palaces, creating shielded rooms where time seemed to slow down and where the wisdom of the ancestors could be heard with perfect clarity. Mansa Musa didn't just have gold, he had harnessed it. In our alternate timeline, the University of Sankore was not just a place of theology and law. It was the world's first quantum treasury. While Europe was still struggling with primitive accounting, the scholars of Mali were using the decimal systems of India and the astronomical mathematics of the Dogon to create a system of paper gold. They created the Mali credit note, shards of specially treated leather or bark inscribed with holographic-like ink made from crushed gold and vegetable dyes. These notes were pegged to the gold reserves hidden in the secret mines. This allowed Mali to move massive amounts of value across the Sahara without the risk of physical theft. If a caravan was raided, the notes were useless without the key, a specific rhythmic chant known only to the authorized merchant. Timbuktu became the Bank of the World, a fortress of knowledge where the wealth was stored not in vaults, but in algorithms. Before Mansa Musa sat upon the throne of Mali, there was his predecessor, Mansa Abu Bakr II. History remembers him as the Voyager King, a ruler who became so obsessed with the great ocean that he abandoned his crown to find its end. In the Orthodox records, he sailed away with 2,000 ships and was never seen again. He is often portrayed as a tragic dreamer, a king who lost his mind to the horizon. But on the Forgotten Kingdoms timeline, Abu Bakr II was no dreamer. He was an explorer general executing the most ambitious colonial project in human history. He didn't sail away because he was tired of ruling. He sailed away because the Oracle Code of Ife, which Mali's scholars had studied, told of a twin land across the water, a land where the gold was as plentiful as the sand and the stars mirrored the sky of the Sahel. The naval tech, ships of the sun. How could a land-based empire cross the Atlantic 2 centuries before Columbus? Mainstream history says it was impossible, but they forget the maritime guilds of the Niger River. The people of Mali had been navigating the massive inland delta for generations. They understood currents. They understood displacement. In our alternate history, Abu Bakr's fleet utilized magnetic navigation. Each ship carried a water compass, a floating needle of magnetized iron housed in a ceramic bowl. But these needles were treated with the same conductive gold dust used in Timbuktu's libraries. This wasn't just a compass, it was a quantum magnetometer. It allowed the fleet to stay in a perfect, rigid formation across thousands of miles of featureless ocean, locked onto the Earth's geomagnetic lines. They didn't just drift to the Americas, they tracked the ocean like a highway. What happened when the lion of Mali met the jaguar of the Maya? In the history they never told you, this wasn't a meeting of conquest, but a meeting of the minds. Musa's predecessor brought gifts, African cotton, specific breeds of hardy goats, and, most importantly, the secret of iron smelting. In return, the people of the New World shared their knowledge of botanical engineering. This explains the anomalies that haunt historians. The presence of African guanine, a specific gold alloy found by early Spanish explorers in the Caribbean. The strange linguistic links between West African dialects and certain Mesoamerican tribes. The depiction of giant stone heads in Olmec culture that bear an uncanny resemblance to West African features. In our timeline, Abu Bakr II established a permanent outpost. By the time Mansa Musa reached Cairo in 1324, he was already receiving overseas reports. Part of that legendary gold he was spending wasn't even from Mali. It was the first dividends from a transatlantic trade network that the rest of the world wouldn't discover for another 170 years. The Golden Bridge. Why did Musa stay behind? Why didn't he follow his brother to the New World? Because Musa was the manager. He stayed to ensure the home node remained stable. He spent his gold in Cairo and Mecca to draw the world's attention north toward the Mediterranean, while the real expansion was happening west in the shadows. It was the ultimate distraction. While the kings of Europe were fighting over tiny plots of land in the Crusades, the Mali Empire was quietly building a global hegemony that spanned 2 continents. The ocean didn't swallow Abu Bakr II, it gave him a second empire. And as we move into our next chapter, we will see how this secret wealth was used to build a shield that protected the Sahel from the eyes of the world. The Cold Gold War. The neutrality of the lion. History loves a conqueror. It loves the clash of steel and the roar of the battlefield. Because of this, mainstream history often frames the eventual transition from the Mali Empire to the Songhai Empire as a simple story of decline and fall. They say Mali grew weak and Songhai grew strong. But in the shadow of the gilded silence, weakness is a mask. In our alternate history, Mansa Musa and his successors were not losing an empire, they were pivoting one. They realized that a physical empire is a target. A borders and blood kingdom can be invaded, but a financial and intellectual monopoly, that is indestructible. This was the beginning of the Cold Gold War. The Golden Shield, neutrality as a weapon. Mali did not build the largest army in Africa because it didn't need to. They had the Golden Shield. Whenever a northern power grew too ambitious or a southern neighbor looked too hungrily at the border, the Mansas didn't send archers, they sent accountants. Mali used its near-infinite gold reserves to fund scientific neutrality. They turned Timbuktu and Djenné into ancient Switzerlands. They offered a deal to the scholars, engineers, and alchemists of the world. Come to the Sahel. We will provide you with gold, laboratory space, and absolute safety from the religious inquisitions and wars of your home countries. In exchange, your inventions belong to the lion. By the mid-1300s, Mali wasn't just exporting gold, they were importing brains. They were funding the brightest minds from Baghdad, Granada, and Byzantium. While Europe was burning heretics, Mali was paying them to solve the mysteries of irrigation, metallurgy, and long-range communication. The Songhai Schism, the security branch. But what of the Songhai? In our hidden history, the rise of the Songhai Empire was not a rebellion, it was a spin-off. The Mansas of Mali realized that the administrative burden of running a multi-continental trade network was too high. They needed a dedicated security and logistics division. They empowered the Songhai, a river-faring martial people, to handle the physical protection of the trade routes. Over time, the Songhai became the private military contractors of the Mali Empire. They held the spear so the Mansas could hold the pen. The wars described in history books between Mali and Songhai were, in our timeline, controlled transitions. Mali moved its core assets, the gold codes, the secret libraries, and the Atlantic fleet, further into the shadows of the forest and the coast, leaving the Songhai to manage the loud, visible, and violent business of being a superpower. Songhai was the firewall, Mali was the kernel. By 1400, the Cold War was in full swing. Mali was effectively subsidizing the Renaissance in Europe, but with a catch. They provided the gold that funded the arts and sciences in Italy, but they did so through middlemen who ensured that Europe remained dependent on African currency. Every time a European king minted a new coin, he was unknowingly strengthening the financial tether to Timbuktu. Mansa Musa's successors were playing a game that spanned centuries. They were waiting for the world to become a single connected market, because they knew that he who controls the source controls the story. The soundscape features a low, vibrating hum, the resonance of the building. If you travel to the inland delta of the Niger River, you will find the largest mud brick building in the world, the Great Mosque of Djenné. To the modern tourist, it is a miracle of traditional Sudano-Sahelian architecture, a structure that must be replastered by the entire community every year in a festival of clay and music. But look closer at its design. The vertical buttresses, the rhythmic rows of wooden beams, known as toron, protrude from the walls, the ostrich eggs crowning the pinnacles. Mainstream architects call these decorative or structural, but in the hidden history of Mali, the Great Mosque was not just a house of prayer, it was a high-frequency shield. It was the hardware that protected the software of the empire. The clay of Djenné is unique. It is harvested from the riverbanks and fermented with organic materials. In our alternate timeline, the secret ingredient was a specific ratio of gold leaf particulates and silicate minerals. This created a bio-ceramic composite. During the blistering heat of the Saharan day, this gold-infused mud acted as a massive heat sink, absorbing thermal energy and storing it. But it didn't just keep the building cool, it converted that heat into a low-level electromagnetic field. The mosque was a battery. It hummed with a frequency that modern instruments would struggle to detect, a white noise that masked the psychic and electronic activities of the Timbuktu scholars from any external interference. And what of the toron? These wooden scaffolding beams are essential for replastering the building. But why are they arranged in such a precise mathematical grid? In the hidden history, the toron were signal relays. The Mali Empire spanned over 1 million square kilometers. To manage such a vast territory, they couldn't rely on horse messengers alone. By using the mosque at Djenné as a master tower, they could send light and vibration signals across the Sahel. The ostrich eggs at the very top. They weren't symbols of fertility, they were parabolic reflectors. Made of a specific calcium carbonate density, they captured the sun's rays and focused them into concentrated beams of light, an ancient Li-Fi system that allowed Timbuktu to talk to the Atlantic coast in a matter of minutes, not months. This architecture provided more than just communication. It provided climate sovereignty. The Mansas knew that the desert was a living enemy. By aligning their mosques and palaces along telluric ley lines, they created a localized atmospheric pressure system. They could literally push the desert back, ensuring that the fertile lands of the empire remained green while the world around them turned to dust. Mali wasn't just wealthy, they were in control of their environment. They had turned the very earth of Africa into a shield that kept the colonial ambitions of the north at bay for 300 years. But every shield has a limit, and every secret eventually grows too heavy to hold. Somber, heavy, filled with the wisdom of a hard-earned sacrifice. The silent fall, the great deactivation. By the late 15th century, the Cold Gold War had reached a turning point that the oracle scholars of Sankore had long dreaded. The frequency of the world was shifting. From the north, the Portuguese caravels were no longer just trading vessels. They were the scouts of a new, hungry world order that prioritized conquest over the slow, balanced alchemy of the Mali Empire. The Mansas looked at the horizon and saw the coming storm. They realized that their gilded silence was about to be broken. If the European powers discovered the true nature of the Ase technology, the power of the gold grid, the Atlantic navigation codes, and the bioceramic resonance of the mosques, they would not use it to heal the world. They would use it to enslave it. And so, the greatest decision in the history of the Sahel was made. Not a surrender, not a defeat, but a controlled shutdown. In your history books, they will tell you that the gold mines of Mali simply ran out, or that the trade routes shifted. But in our secret history, the mines didn't run out. They were salted. The salt used by the priests was a high-density blocking agent, a mineral compound designed to short-circuit the conductive properties of the gold veins. They were putting the earth into a coma. They realized that the only way to protect the wealth of Africa was to make it invisible to the eyes of those who only valued it for its weight in coins. They effectively unplugged the empire. The signal towers atop the mosques were dismantled. The copper caps on the Toran beams were buried in the deep desert. The gold-infused clay was covered over with standard mud, hiding the circuitry of the mainframe mosques beneath the skin of a primitive structure. Then came the books. The thousands of manuscripts in Timbuktu contained the admin codes for the empire. If the invading armies of the future ever found them all in one place, the great deactivation could be reversed. The scholars performed a human defragmentation. They broke the library into thousands of pieces. They gave one family a book on astronomy, another a book on medicine, another the navigational maps of Abu Bakr II. They told them, forget what you have. Bury it in your basements, hide it in your walls, let it become a legend. Do not speak of its power until the world is ready to hear the lion's roar again. This is why to this day, families in Timbuktu still pull ancient, perfectly preserved manuscripts from their floorboards. They are the fragments of a shattered hard drive, waiting for the recovery key. Mali didn't fall to the Songhai, or the Moroccans, or the French. It simply moved into a ghost partition. It exists in the silence of the salt mines. It exists in the superstitions of the elders who refuse to dig in certain spots. It exists in the DNA of the people who still carry the memory of the Golden Bridge. The wealth of Mansa Musa was not lost. It was encrypted. And the final chapter of our journey will reveal where that encryption is starting to crack in the modern world.